Those kind words. First question is, can anybody hear me?
Perfectly.
Yes. Perfectly good. Well, when I joined in the oil industry as it was then, just over 50 years ago, it was quite a learning experience because I knew nothing about it. Now, 50 years later, things have changed a bit. It's other things I know nothing about, not the oil industry, and there are plenty of other things. So I'm going to speak very briefly about change and disillusion. The two tend to go together. There are probably 50 students around universities writing philosophy theses on change. I'm not going to touch that depth of knowledge or inexperience, and the point is that over 50 years, the oil industry has changed, the energy industry has changed, the political system has changed, public standards have changed. There has been an enormous amount of change. I think the most useful thing I can do now is just to categorize the things to look for when you're in a changing world. And I'm copying the former Vice President of the United States. I'm copying the idea of there are some things that have changed and you understand it. There are some things that are changing and you don't understand the changes. There are some things that may change and you don't know when or where, and there are some things that probably will change, but you don't know any of the detail. And that's the sort of problem that we face when we look forward. And of course, everybody tends to have their own views, and they form expectations on which decisions are taken. And that's really all I'm going to say about change, except that my observation is that large institutions are very bad at predicting change, partly because so many things interact with each other. So the change in one sector, like automobiles, is going to affect other sectors. And the other reason is that I think big institutions tend to rely on their own words rather than on external sources. And within an institution, forecasts get turned into aspirations, and aspirations get turned into domestic politics. And one thing and another, they're very often wrong. And this goes also for institutions like the International Energy Agency or the Energy Intelligence Agency in the US, where party lines develop, and it's very difficult for them to change. And although the IEA databases and forecasts are very widely used because they're the only ones that appear to be comprehensive, I think one has to accept that they may point to a general direction of change, but not much detail. And that leaves us all swimming in the dark. Now, what I'm constantly saying, where are the sources of disillusion? Well, the sources of disillusion are when things go wrong or not as expected. Over 50 years, there are quite a lot of those. The stability of the Middle East was one which has left many people disillusioned, including people in the Middle East themselves. The future of coal was foreseen as a savior of the energy crisis, so-called. Where is it now? We now have a generally accepted trend of change in the direction of cutting down on low-carbon fuels and through that cutting down on emissions of carbon dioxide. Pinned on the Paris Agreement and the quotas and national plans that were tabled in the course of the Paris negotiations. Well, these figures come from projections for 30 to 40 years ahead, and anyone who's worked with compound interest will know that you only need to know the rate of growth and the starting point. You can produce any number you want. So one can't take the figures for 2020, 2030 very literally, but you can take the direction quite literally, leaving we poor suckers to take the risks of investing for one course or another. And I think in that field, there are some things that are not fall into the category of things we know are going to change, but we don't know the detail or when. And we don't even know whether the assumptions on which they're based are going to hold up for the next 30 years. I personally would put natural gas in that category. It's easy to see more gas is going to be used. It's easy to see more American gas is going to be used. I think the size and scale of the LNG market is very much uncertain. And one could go through some of the other things that that are at the moment appear to be winners in the medium term against the others. And I think my only kind of bit of wisdom for that is see where the numbers come from. Keep an eye on the people who really know the subject and don't just copy the things that have already been accumulated by international agencies, consultants, and people like me. That's, I hope, a few minutes. Thank you.